Well, good day, grammar fans. We have a great cooking show for you today. First of all, we'll have Hillary, and she'll be doing prepositional phrases to make our grammar cake. Secondly, we'll have Alina, and she'll be adding her relative clauses to our cake. Thirdly, we'll have Kaylina, and she'll be doing participle phrases, and Katie will come on finally, and she'll finish up with punctuation. We'll have a great cake for you today. We're all really excited about it, and we hope that you'll cherish this cake for your holiday season.
In our lesson, I'll be teaching you about prepositional phrases, which is the butter of our adjectival cake. First, let's learn about the different parts of a prepositional phrase. The basic pattern or recipe for a prepositional phrase is a preposition plus a determiner plus a noun. A prepositional phrase doesn't necessarily have to have all these parts. The determiner is used as a modifier and isn't needed to make the entire phrase. Now let's break down and find out what all of these terms mean. The definition of a preposition is a member of a class of words that are used before nouns or pronouns and function as modifiers of verbs, nouns, and adjectives. Examples of prepositions are words such as on, by, to, as in, or since. Determiners are markers of nouns. These can include articles such as a or the, possessive nouns and pronouns like his, my, or ours, demonstrative pronouns like this or that, quantifiers like many or several, indefinite pronouns such as each, every, and different numbers like 1, 2, or 3. And as we all know, nouns are people, places, or things. All of these word classes together make a prepositional phrase. Our chapter is on adjectivals, and the role of an adjectival prepositional phrase is to identify the noun headword in relation to time, place, direction, purpose, or origin. These phrases also help us to identify the noun by answering the question, which one, what kind of, whose, or how many. An example would be, she rode her bike along Water Street. Bike would be the noun headword in the sentence because it precedes the prepositional phrase, which is along Water Street. Along is the preposition and Water Street is the noun. It is answering the question where she rode her bike along Water Street. That's all.
Welcome back, folks. Now we have Alina here, and she's going to talk about relative clauses and how they fit into our great cake.
Relative clause is also known as adjectival clause, and as you may know, it's dependent clause. It answers the question which one and what kind of. For example, an oil which is in this bottle is essential ingredient for cake mix. Which one? The one in the bottle. Relative clause is a sentence pattern complete with a subject and predicate. The only difference between relative clause and complete sentence is the introductory word, the relative pronoun, who, whose, whom, which, or that. When you go to the store, you need to know what kind of oil you need for the cake mix. And you need to know what the oil looks like and where you can find it. So I will give you a small guideline how to recognize a relative clause. Firstly, the relative pronoun renames the headword of the noun phrase in which it appears. Secondly, the relative pronoun fills a sentence slot in its own clause. And the last but not the least one, the relative pronoun introduces the clause no matter what slot it fills. And a little vanilla to the relative clause is expletive that. The antecedent of that is the word it attached to in the diagram. That fills the slot in the clause. That opens its clause even though it functions as the direct object in this clause. The relative that is often deleted, but the deletion is possible only when the pronoun functions as an object in its clause, not when it acts as the subject. For example, a theory you studied in the school will help you bake a lot of good sentences in the future. Or, for cake mix you cannot choose ingredients that you like, because there's a certain rules and order you have to know before you start to bake a cake. It is similar with the grammar, so you better learn these rules.
Now that we're back from our commercial break, we're adding eggs to our adjectival cake, and we have Kaylini here, and she's going to talk about participial phrases, a very important part of our cake.
Thanks. When you bake a cake, eggs are an essential part to it. You definitely can't forget them, otherwise the cake will turn out flat and will not rise. You may not be able to taste the eggs, but they are just as important as all of the other ingredients. In grammar, participial phrases function the same way. You may know that a participial phrase is somewhere in a sentence, but you may have a hard time identifying one. Well, I am here to clear that up for you so you can be well on your way to baking a spectacular grammar cake with all of the important forms. First of all, you have probably seen participial phrases all of your life, yet you probably haven't studied them in depth until right about now. The direct definition for a participial phrase is a participle together with all of its complements and modifiers. Well, you're probably wondering what a participle actually is. A participle is the ing and en verb or verb phrase functioning as an adjectival or adverbial. Participles can be thought of as present or past. Like you might even already know, the participial phrases can function as adjectivals. For example, the students from Eau Claire have a long way to travel for Thanksgiving break. From Eau Claire is describing the students and therefore is acting as an adjectival. Earlier we talked about relative clauses. Well, the cool thing about participial phrases is that you can change the form of the verb in the relative clause by just adding the be form plus the ing to it. For example, a relative clause might be the girl who works at the bakery. If we change the verb works to working, the phrase would be the girl working at the bakery. Just by looking at this sentence, we know that the participial phrase is a reduced relative clause. The girl working at the bakery. Now this noun phrase with its participial phrase as a modifier will fit in any nominal slot of a sentence. So we could say, I know the girl working at the bakery. The participial phrase is acting as a subject when you say, the girl working at the bakery is very nice to her customers. Lastly, you can also say, I usually buy my bread from the girl working at the bakery. This time, the participial phrase is acting as the object of the preposition from. Another type of participial phrase includes pre-noun participles. Like it sounds, these are participles that come before the noun. However, the participle is a verb alone with no complements or phrasal modifiers. Yet an adverb might modify the participle too. For example, you could say, your meowing cat keeps begging me for food. Or you could say, your loudly meowing cat keeps begging me for food. Since we are presently baking a cake right now, we can say that all of the participles that we have been using so far are in the ing form of the verb, which is the present participle. Let's jump back into the past and pretend that we already baked a cake last night. This form would be the ed ending form, and it is typically called the past participle or passive participle. An example of this would be, the cake baked by Emily is truly a masterpiece. This, baked by Emily, is the past participle. Like I said before, ing participles are actually reduced clauses. Well, so can en participles. They can be reduced clauses as well. Participial phrases can also act as object complements. For example, I could smell the cake baking quickly. Baking quickly would be complementing the object, which is the cake. Unlike a relative clause, a participial phrase can be shifted to the beginning or the end of the sentence when it modifies a subject, like in this sentence. Baked by Emily, the cake for this grammar project is one of the best cakes ever. Baked by Emily, the cake for this grammar project is one of the best cakes ever, is an example of how you can shift a participial phrase from the beginning or the end of the sentence. Sometimes when you crack an egg, it is easy to accidentally add shells to the rest of the mix. So when you are using participial phrases, make sure that you use them right. That is, the participle can open the sentence only when it's the subject. Only when its subject is also the subject of the sentence and is located in its regular subject position. Otherwise, you will end up with a dangling participle, kind of like a shell, that is dangling in your cake mix. We talked about how participles can be used as adjectivals, but sometimes they can be used as adverbials. For example, or my last example, we can say, Katie spent a lot of time making her apron. Making her apron, that is the adverbial. What?
Thanks for sticking around, everyone. Next up we have Katie, and she's going to tell us about punctuation of the adjectival cake, a very important part.
Alrighty. Thank you for joining me today, group. First of all, everyone knows the thing that ties a cake together and makes it worth eating at all is the frosting. And the frosting for our grammar cake, in this case, is punctuation of clauses and participles. The number one thing that you need to know when dealing with the punctuation of these clauses and participles is whether or not they are restrictive or non-restrictive modifiers in the sentence. This brings up the question, should I use a comma or not? The first thing you have to think about is if the noun being modified is clear to the reader. If there is only one possible noun, or it is the plural understood, there is only one noun being modified. The modifier in this case cannot restrict the noun's meaning anymore, making it a non-restrictive modifier, and therefore it will be set off by commas. If the referent of the noun is not clear to the reader, if there is more than one possible or the number is unknown, the purpose of the modifier becomes to restrict the meaning of the noun, making it a restrictive modifier requiring no commas. For some people, it is easier to think of the term restrictive as defining the noun, and the term non-restrictive is commenting on the noun. Context will, of course, always make a difference, which is why it's always very, very important to assess what the reader already knows. When making a decision on whether or not to use a comma in a clause or participle phrase, you need to pay close attention to what the reader already knows and what the reader is going to assume because of the comma placement. To avoid comma errors, it is best to say the sentence aloud, the way you would normally speak it, placing commas where pauses in the sentence sound natural. There are just a few more important clues about punctuation that are very, very helpful. First, the adjectival that clause is never set off by commas, so therefore is always restrictive. The which clause is generally non-restrictive, therefore requiring commas. If the relative can be deleted, the clause is restrictive, and after any proper noun, the modifier will be non-restrictive. Also, after any common noun that has only one possible referent as the modifier, the modifier will be non-restrictive. Let's look at some examples. Danielle got the spot on the cheerleading team, for which I also tried out. This sentence has the which clause in the sentence, making it non-restrictive, requiring a comma between the words team and for. Let's test it out using our tool for saying the sentence aloud, with the comma in place. Danielle got the spot on the cheerleading team, for which I also tried out. Let's try one more. The delivery van that I drive for work is always unreliable. Since that in the sentence is removable, we know that it is restrictive, requiring no commas. Thanks for joining me today, and remember, frosting is most important.
I think it's close to being done. Do you smell what I smell? I think it's finished. Our adjectival cake. We're done.